then she challenged me further and said, I think that you should write short stories about the people in your book. So I did, and the first story that I did, I've done two. The first one I did is this woman.
I've seen that.
And the story is called The Red Sari. And there's your book.
Thank you.
And I'll do this too. And this is the story, The Red Sari. Cursing the heat, Veena adjusts the dupatta of her red sari, pulling it close around her shining hair, farther down over her damp forehead, and hurries through the gully, turning first right, then left as she makes her way to her mother's door. Charmingly, she was named for the instrument with which her father wooed her mother all those years ago. It can't bring him back, but it does make her feel closer to him since his death. Deepa, a young musician, was fortunate enough to have found a place with a wedding group, and so played several days and evenings each week, earning a good salary. It was 1972, and the wedding business was thriving. Although a mere 22, he was earning at the rate of a much more experienced musician, partly because he was unattached to wife and family and available anytime, and partly because he played his instrument in such a romantic and soulful way. 18-year-old Shardita was a guest at the wedding of Amer Singh and Shruti Patel, and when she heard him play a brief but lovely solo, her heart melted, and she became determined to meet the handsome musician. Her parents, of course, had other ideas for her, but Shardita, being a slightly spoiled and willful young woman, wanted none of their plans for her future as a daughter-in-law to some well-to-do but overbearing mother-in-law. And so, when the band took a break, she excused herself to the ladies' room and went in search of the Veena player. It didn't take long to find him leaning against a pillar in the garden, smoking a bidi. His eyes were dark and looked downward as she passed, but when she stopped in front of him, he raised them, looking full into the amber of hers. He looked at her openly, amused at such boldness in a young woman, and impressed in some strange way by her easy approach. He smiled shyly, rendered a bit helpless by her courage. She stared back, a smile curving her delicate mouth. Neither of them dared speak for several minutes that seemed eternal, but finally Deepa cleared his throat and, tossing the bidi away while exhaling, greeted her. It's in Hindi. It's been translated for me. Good evening, he said. Shardita, always direct, spoke her mind. You are playing the Veena so beautifully, she said. Thank you, he answered, looking down again. He was glad for the moonless night, because he knew he was blushing like a schoolboy caught staring at the teacher's breasts. But as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and walked hurriedly away, the beading on her lenga swirling heavily around her ankles, and her sandals slapping the marble like applause. Deepa knew enough people at the wedding to find out who she was and where she lived, and the following week he sent the jasmine garland with a message that poetically praised her beauty. Your eyes, he wrote, are the gold of the Rajas, your mouth the finest rubies ever mined, with a smile that stole my heart away. He didn't add that her skin was like velvet he would love to caress, as he felt it somehow too forward, and gave the note to a boy to deliver with the garland. Fortunately, Shardita was at home alone when it arrived, and a servant brought it to her. Her face burned with excitement as she tore the seal and read his words. She crushed the garland against her cheek, releasing its fragrance in a rush of emotion. For some time, Shardita's parents fought the idea valiantly, but in the end, after being moved by Deepa's charms, agreed to the marriage, and the two were wed later that year in a ceremony with Deepa's band, mine as a Veena, playing. Veena was born the following autumn, followed by a brother and sister within 3 years. Deepa had success after success in music, as if Shardita brought him good fortune, and recorded several albums. He was asked to move to Delhi to play with a major group, and packed his young family up and left Banaras behind. Today, as she walks hurriedly through the gullies towards her mother's home, Veena thinks about her father, his handsomeness, his easy humor, and his grace during his illness. He smiled until the end, and she knows wherever he is now, he's smiling still. She misses him. He is like her phantom limb, always felt though absent. Of all the children, he loved her best. She knows this plainly and unashamedly. She was, and is, and always will be his Veena, the instrument of his heart. She smiles at the thought, and though the heat is oppressive, she is happy in that understanding. Her mother lives quietly, simply, a widow in the city of widows, one in thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, moving about like ghosts in white saris, widow's weeds. Veena dreads this visit, as all visits to her mother, but you can't put a finger exactly on what creates the anxiety. When her parents lived in Delhi, she had none of these feelings of being a foreigner. But here, there is nothing that is familiar, and she feels adrift. Having been a successful student through childhood, she left for the United States after graduation and studied to be a doctor, finishing med school at the top of her class. She still comes home to India once a year or so, even now that she's married. Her husband, David, whom she met in her residency at Mass General, is an American success story, being the youngest surgeon to reattach a severed hand, all the parts working, as if the hand had never been detached. David, however, has no interest in traveling to India and was happy to pay for her entire family to come to Boston for their wedding to avoid having to ever set foot on subcontinental soil. A Jew from New York, he laughingly tells people he avoids third world nations at all costs. The truth is, in his heart, he's unnerved by anything he can't control, although Veena may be the one exception to his hard and fast rule. So here she is, visiting Mummy alone, as always, filled with trepidation that has nothing to do with anything she can name. She moves forward, knowing the way and wishing her mother didn't live here among the smells of goats and cooking fires and cow dung. She understands the whys, her father dying penniless and in debt, her mother wanting to spend the rest of her life among what she refers to as her people. It's all clear, but having lived so long in an American city, Veena can't connect to her mother's desire to live here in the ruins with none of the conveniences she herself enjoys. Although she and David had long ago decided not to have children, laughing together at the conjecture that they're both too selfish to share one another with a third or fourth being, they have a rich life, filled with good things in one another. The offer has been repeatedly made to her mother to come to the U.S. and live the easier life they could provide for her. But she continues to reject it. Here in Benares lives her mother's family. Her brother and sister never left. And although her husband and parents are dead, their cremations were here, as were those of her grandparents and the rest of her clan. And so, as if their ashes, and indeed they themselves, are still alive somewhere in the waters of the Ganges, Shargita remains in Benares alone. Veena does not understand. As she nears the last turn, she is sweating through her choli. Twin dark red crescents paint her armpits. She wipes the sweat from her upper lip with a forefinger and inhales as if she's about to lift a heavy weight. Turning the corner, nearly tripping over a mangy sleeping dog and a small child, clad only in a filthy t-shirt, with copious kajal ringing each wide brown eye, she sees her mother at the door of her home, anxiously waiting for her. She musters a grin and shines its full light on her mother, standing there in expectation, matching her mother's smile, a world away from home.